is What is Nerd? My name is Tyler Dietz, and I'm just a big old nerd on a podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Nick Grant. And Nick, how much of a nerd would you consider yourself?
Like on a scale from 1 to 10, I'd say I'm about a 6. Like I'm pretty nerdy, but I have so much to learn.
How about you, JP?
Well, when it comes to video games and all this stuff we're going to be talking about, let's just say that I am very out of the loop. It's like all this stuff is like a whole new world to me.
Well, and that's why Nick and I decided to start this podcast up. So for those tuning in, if you guys are not familiar, the three of us host a podcast called What is Sports? And the whole concept of that show is I am not familiar with sports, or at least I wasn't familiar with sports until we started the podcast. So we decided to start this one up because JP is an interesting specimen for us to talk about. He really is a level 0 nerd.
So, true story. Back in the day, it must have been 2008. I got potlucked with JP to be my roommate in college, and we started messaging each other on MySpace. And we were first bonding about the Rangers, the Texas Rangers baseball team, and things like that. And I told him I bought a PS3, and I just bought a game it was the Sonic collection, where it had all the Sonic games. I was really excited. And I kid you not, JP wrote back, well, I don't know who Sonic is, but I'm sure he's a pretty cool hedgehog. And I've told multiple people that story, just because I couldn't believe that somebody had never heard of Sonic the Hedgehog.
Yes.
And every time, everybody goes like, are you serious? Who doesn't know who Sonic the Hedgehog is? And so,
did he grow up in the wilderness or something?
I just grew up in the country in Paris.
But so that's kind of part of the thing that I want to get down to the bottom, and the big mystery at the center of this is, how did JP grow up without ever learning about Sonic the Hedgehog?
That's a good question. I really don't know. I mean, is he like as big as Mario? I mean, no, I wouldn't say so, but
no.
He's probably bigger than other games I've heard of.
He was as big as Mario.
Oh yeah,
I would say. What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, I mean he's pretty big. He became Sega's mascot and kind of took the world by storm for a little bit. Took some of Mario's thunder just because he was cool and new. But
maybe that's why, because I've never played Sega before. I don't even know if I've ever seen a Sega. But I started on Nintendo and then N64. Those are the first games I played. Those are like the only games I've really ever played.
Well, all that's about to change. Because between the three of us, we represent the wide spectrum of nerdiness, right? So you got myself up at the top. I'd consider myself like a 9 as far as nerds go. There are people who are nerdier than me, but I'm one of those guys who goes to Comic Cons and anime conventions and stuff like that. I'm not as into that stuff as I used to be, like back in high school and college, but I'm still pretty knowledgeable about a lot of that. And then you got Nick in the middle, and then JP way down at the bottom. So the point of this show is to serve as an introduction and like an overview of all the things that are considered to be nerdy entertainment. By this, we're defining it as comic books, anime, video games, board games, and different types of science fiction and fantasy. So movies, books, all that stuff. This is all that we're grouping as quote-unquote nerdy entertainment. Now, before we dive into our first topic, if you enjoy the show, please give us a like on our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter at whatisnerd1 with no question mark. And also subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play if you haven't yet, and leave us a rating or review. Also, obviously, check out our sister show, What is Sports, if you guys like this. Even if you're not a sports fan, the whole point of that is to introduce new sports and kind of talk about sports in a simple way, I guess, easy to follow way. And finally, if you have any questions or comments, send us an email at winerdcast@gmail.com. So, let's go ahead and get into it. We're talking about video games. And I guess we're starting on this because JP didn't know who Sonic the Hedgehog was, right? And I'd say that, JP, do you think that of all the things that I listed, is video games your least knowledgeable thing? Or
I mean, that's really tough. I would say anime, and then didn't you say Pokemon and?
Well, Pokemon is.
Oh, okay, considered that category.
Pokemon is not a genre, JP.
Well, that's what I meant, like Pokemon and those card games. I guess maybe that's considered in that category. I don't know.
Well, yeah, because we'll get into because Pokemon's weird because it's an anime and it's a video game and it's a card game. But so you don't know Pokemon, right?
I don't know anything about Pokemon.
He doesn't know anything. I mean, about
what a
any of this
Pikachu looks like.
Yeah, I mean,
what color is Pikachu?
He's a yellow little. I don't know what you call him.
He's a Pikachu.
Yeah,
like,
he's a Pikachu.
What you call him? It's a Pikachu.
Nick, what's your history with video games?
Well, growing up, I've always been intrigued by video games. I didn't have a console until late 90s whenever we finally got a Nintendo 64 for Christmas. And before that, though, I'd go to my friends' houses and play Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, and I was hooked. We had a computer at my house that I love playing games, but I didn't have any money, so I'd play like the same 2 or 3 games over and over again. And I always loved...
Was it like Math Blaster or something like that?
No, I had a game called Pac in Time. It was like a side-scroller adventure of Pac-Man where he had a family and then some witch sends him back in time. It was actually a lot of fun. And then I also played Mega Man, which was really tough.
That's a good one.
And then eventually, like in 4th grade, I bought Sonic 3 and Knuckles for computer. And so I played a ton of Sonic 3. But
I didn't know that was on computer.
Well, I mean, yeah, they just ported it. I mean, it was fun. But my parents, they said, okay, if you make straight A's in your report card, we'll let you rent like a Sega Genesis or Super Nintendo, and you can rent a game or 2 for the weekend. So that's I'd try to get good grades to play these games. And so growing up, I played a lot of Sonic. I mean, I love Sonic. And then just random other games like Ninja Turtles and things like that. But so I've always wanted to be a gamer. And then I finally became one with Nintendo 64. And
you achieved your dream.
I did, and now I still play a lot. I mean, I'm almost 30 years old, and I still play a lot of games. I guess that's pretty much considered nerdy in its own regard. But that's pretty much it. Like I guess I was meant to be a gamer. If I'm being honest with myself and our listeners.
Born to be a gamer.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. So actually, I didn't have the Nintendo 64. I had the PlayStation. I was a PlayStation kid, and I feel like I had wanted a Nintendo 64, but I feel like all my friends had that, so I had options. Go over to their house and play GoldenEye or Super Smash Brothers or Mario Kart or whatever. Before that, I grew up with a Nintendo, the original Nintendo, the NES. We ended up getting a Super Nintendo, I guess, whenever I was a bit older, like around 10 or so. I remember I played Donkey Kong Country, and it blew my mind. I was just like, oh my god, like Donkey Kong Country. It's still one of my favorite games.
Oh, definitely. Ever. And at the time, I mean, the graphics were insane because it looked 3D and it looked so real compared to a bunch of just cartoony characters. But again, we can get into that later. But yes, man, love Donkey Kong.
Does each character have their own game? Within Mario? See, like Donkey Kong Country. I mean
honestly...
Wait. Is Donkey Kong in Mario?
Yes.
Well, that's a great question.
Is he a character in Mario?
Let's save that for later, because that is a great question, and we'll get to that.
And then there's Diddy Kong. Who is Diddy Kong? His little cousin or something?
Is it a younger brother or nephew or something?
No, he's his friend.
Oh,
they're not related. Gorillas and chimpanzees ain't the same species, y'all.
But they have the same initials.
They have the same last name, though.
Okay, maybe. I don't know.
No, I was just wondering because I don't know. There's so much I don't know.
Well, okay, so first I wanted to start with, so Nick, your histories with consoles. I wanted to give a brief shout out to PC gaming before we get into the consoles, because this episode will be mostly about console gaming. However, I've gotten into PC gaming recently, and we can have another episode about that. But if you're learning about video games, or if you're thinking about getting into gaming and stuff like that, do not get into PC gaming because it is a pain. It's expensive to build a gaming PC, and if you buy the wrong parts or if you install your parts incorrectly, you can just waste a lot of money. So JP, what do you know about video game consoles of today?
Well, we have the PlayStation consoles, right?
So which PlayStation are we currently on?
Currently on what, like a PS 5. When a PlayStation 5, right?
No.
4?
We're on number 4, yeah.
Okay. Then we have Xbox.
Which Xbox are we on right now?
Let's see, more Xbox 3. Xbox 4.
Xbox One.
Oh, gosh. So how come there's been 4 PlayStations and 1 Xbox?
There hasn't been 1 Xbox. There's been 3 Xboxes.
But how come it's not Xbox 3?
I don't know.
Ask Microsoft, man. We don't make the rules.
And then we have, what about the Xbox 360?
That was the second Xbox.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So Xbox is the first Xbox. Xbox 360 is the second Xbox.
And Xbox One
is
is
the
the
third
third.
Xbox. So who the hell knows what they're going to call the next one?
See, maybe that's why it's just so confusing.
Okay, what about Nintendo?
We have the Nintendo Wii.
Yeah, but that's not the new one. What's the new one called?
It's the Nintendo One. No, it's the Mega Nintendo.
Yeah.
What?
No.
Oh, golly.
That's the Nintendo Switch. Is what we're
Oh,
currently on.
okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'm sorry. Which company is with which console? Microsoft is with
Great question.
Xbox. Blah blah. I don't get that.
Nick, go ahead.
Yeah. Microsoft, they do Xbox. Sony does PlayStation. And then Nintendo does all the Nintendo stuff. And Nintendo obviously has been around for a long time.
Sony,
well, and so we're going to dive into like the history and stuff of all the consoles. But let's talk about the current ones first. So Nick, which one do you think is the best? So we got the Nintendo Switch, PS4, and the Xbox 3.
Or you mean the Xbox One?
Right. So which one is the best in your opinion?
I mean, it's hard for me to say because I've only played the PlayStation 4, but it kind of depends what you want. I feel like Nintendo has a history of a lot of fun, lighthearted games. They have a lot of classics on there. You have Mario, you have Legend of Zelda. They bring back a lot of their old stars. I mean, there's a lot of Metroid games and things like that. And PlayStation, I feel like, is more focused towards a lot of story-driven games and a lot of exclusives. And Xbox, we talked about this a little bit before, I think it might be a more powerful machine than the PlayStation 4, but I really don't know because I haven't played it. But from what I've read, heard, and seen, the Xbox really doesn't have a lot of good exclusive games. So I think I'm leaning more towards PlayStation in that regard because the best games on the Xbox aren't exclusive, so you can play them on PlayStation. So why not just play, in my opinion, why not just play a PlayStation? Then you can play all these other exclusives like, what were we saying earlier? You got...
on PlayStation?
Yeah, well, you have the Uncharted series, you have
Uncharted's
The Last of
big.
Us, you have Spider-Man was really popular, God of War, Horizon Zero Dawn, those are some of the new ones. And then, of course, there's stupid Fortnite, which I know is crazy popular, but...
Fortnite's exclusive to
I believe so. I thought it was. I know it was kind of like the answer to PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds, which was really popular on Xbox. I'm pretty sure it's exclusive, but I could be mistaken. But anyway.
Well, yeah, because JP may not realize this, but certain consoles have certain games that aren't on other consoles. Right, you know that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so most games come out on multiple consoles, but really if you hypothetically were considering to buy a video game console, I would also agree to I would recommend getting the PlayStation 4, like Nick said, because there's more really good games that are on the PlayStation 4 that are not on any of the other consoles.
And like I said earlier, I mean, that's not really a knock on the Xbox. I know there are some really good exclusive series. I mean, talk about Halo, that was huge. And I know Gears of War was a really big series as well. So there are exclusives on the Xbox, but I just don't have a whole lot of experience playing them. And I'm more of a Sony fanboy, I guess, so that's why I lean more towards PlayStation. But
yeah.
And then there's still a lot of good stuff on Nintendo as well.
And to make a correction, Fortnite is on Xbox One.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Yes, but my deal with Xbox, though, so if I were to coach somebody were to want to become a a gamer, I would say buy yourself a PS4. Then think about building yourself a gaming PC, because with a gaming PC, obviously you can use it for computer stuff, but also if you have Windows, Microsoft Windows, you can actually play any game that's on Xbox through Windows. Did you know that, Nick?
I did not, but that's a pretty awesome feature.
Yeah, because you have access to like the Microsoft Store and stuff. So like on my PC, I have Gears of War. The new one, I don't have the Xbox One. So really, Xbox One is for players who really want these specific titles. Technically, the Xbox One X, which is the current like best Xbox that you can get, is the most powerful of the consoles. But if you make a gaming PC, that's going to be more powerful than an Xbox One X. So that's kind of my advice. Now, Nintendo is a weird thing because Nintendo's always been like separate. Not always, but ever since like the GameCube, a long time ago. Do you remember the GameCube, JP?
Yes, actually, and that was one I was thinking of earlier. But yeah, I can't even tell you what a GameCube looks like. Was it a cube shape?
It's a cube. Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. I think I saw one once at a friend's house.
Yeah,
but never played it.
But I love Nintendo stuff. I still haven't bought a Switch yet, but I mean, I feel really kind of like attached to the franchises that they have in Nintendo, and I feel like I'm missing out a lot if I don't have the Nintendo console. But usually I'll wait a while till it gets cheap, and then I'll buy it and then catch up on all the old stuff. Because the other thing is, whatever Nintendo console is current, they don't come out with a bunch of games for it. At least games that are worth playing. What was is the last Nintendo console that you own, Nick, the Nintendo 64?
Yeah, well, my brother, he bought a GameCube, and he bought a Wii. And so I played those, but they were more of basically his consoles. And
yeah.
So I played them a little bit. I was really too busy playing PlayStation 2, which is what I bought. So
you were saying that whenever there's a new console out, there's the new console, but you won't have any good games to play on it?
So that's actually a good question. They have what they call launch titles, and so whenever a console comes out, they'll have like a set number of games that launch with the console that come out on the same day that the console comes out. But realistically, like there might be like one or two good launch titles that are worth playing whenever a console comes out. Like Nick, what's a launch title that you can think of?
Well, off the top of my head, Halo for the Xbox, wasn't that?
Yeah.
And I have some notes about that later. But I mean, that was I would think one of the most successful launch titles. Well, then you got Mario with NES. Didn't the original Mario come out on NES at the same time?
It did.
And what else? Wii Sports came out with the Nintendo Wii, and that was a huge game.
Like sometimes a launch title can be so exciting and good that people will buy the console just to play that new game. Okay, well let's kind of dive into the history a little bit because we talked about it a bit. So Nick, go ahead and start us off talking about really the oldest form of video games, arcades.
First off, I just want to kind of give my experience with arcade games. I grew up in the 90s, and like I mentioned before, and I didn't have a console, as I also mentioned before, at home. And I would love going to the arcade. It was so much fun. I would, beg my parents for money and quarters and tokens, and they would usually give me money for it, and so it'd be fun. But it was a blast, and one of the biggest thrills you'll ever get at an arcade is you be playing a game for a while, and you realize, oh no, I died, and I'm out of quarters or tokens. And so you'd run back to your parents, hopefully before the countdown doesn't hit 0, and beg for money. And then they'd say, "Fine, kid, here you go." And you'd hope that nobody jumped on the box before you came back. So that was fun.
What was your arcade favorite as a child?
Oh man, pretty much I would go to Mazio's a lot as a kid. Shout out to Mazio's. And they had several games, but the main ones that I played the most were Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Area 51, and Sunset Riders. Those are probably my 3 top games. And then I also really liked Time Crisis 2, which was a really cool game. Then you got Hydro Thunder, which was a lot of fun. And then like all the like Cruising World, Cruising USA, that was a lot of fun too.
JP, did any of those ring a bell?
No, but if I saw them, I might recognize them. I mean, I was never like Nick. I didn't go to a lot of arcades as a kid. Every once in a while, I was be at the beach and there'd be like an arcade or something nearby.
Mm-hmm.
I'd go in and play in the arcade, and I don't know. Every once a year or so, I'd end up being in like CC's. They have arcades.
Yeah,
there.
CC's is
or the
good.
movies. They have some arcade games there, or like maybe a random hotel might have some arcade games.
Did y'all? So both y'all are from kind of small Texas towns, right? Nick, you're from Athens. JP from Paris. Did y'all have Chuck E. Cheese or like a Dave and Buster's type place?
No.
No, we had Mazio's. And we had Mazio's and Ken's Pizza. They had, I think, two boxes. One was, I think they had Street Fighter and some, like one of those flying games where you're a plane and it was a rail shooter where you got hit once, you'd lose a life. It was really fun, really hard. But that was pretty much it. We would come to Tyler and they had a Chuck E. Cheese and that was fun.
Yeah, that was Chuck E. Cheese was my jam. I liked the Simpsons game, the Jurassic Park shooting game where you're in the truck and the T-Rex is chasing you.
Yeah, man, that was pretty crazy.
Yeah.
there's so many great games,
Yeah.
but before we get bogged down, I just want to kind of go to the brief overview history of arcade games. When the first games came out, they were not very exciting by today's standards, but there was what was the first one? Pong came out in 1972, where you have two bars basically guarding each side of the screen, and there's a little square ball that would go from each side, and you had to, make it. It was like air hockey basically, and that came out in 1972, and the golden age of video arcade games started in 1978. JP, have you heard of Space Invaders, Asteroids, Pac-Man, or Donkey Kong?
Well, definitely have heard of Pac-Man and Donkey Kong.
You never heard of Space Invaders?
I think I have.
So Space Invaders, that game, you're basically a little tank on the ground, and I think there's like 5 different little villages they need to protect, and these bug-looking aliens are floating above the screen, dropping little bombs at you, and you have to avoid their shots, their bombs, and also make sure you destroy them before they destroy your little village. And that was really popular in 1978.
They come like closer and closer, and there's more of them. You just gotta shoot them all. Basically.
Okay, yeah, I know. I feel like I played that game.
You know Galaga, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Maybe.
It's kind of like that, but a little bit less moving around.
Yeah, and so these games are very simple, but people flock to them because, it's brand new technology. It's just like today, whenever there's a new console, it's so brand new and so powerful. It's just so exciting. But that was the golden age, those kind of games. And JP, you mentioned earlier, you asked about Donkey Kong. And Donkey Kong was also the first game that featured Mario.
Yes. So Donkey Kong is not a Mario character. Mario is a Donkey Kong character.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah, at the time, though, Mario was known as Jump Man because he jumped over all of the
barrels,
the barrels and fire things that he had to go up the little like bars to try to save his girlfriend.
So Donkey Kong was the bad guy, though, and so Mario had to save the princess.
Oh, really? I had no idea Donkey Kong was a bad guy.
Oh yeah, man.
Was he ever turned into a good guy?
I believe at some. Actually, no. Did you know this, Nick? Okay, so in Donkey Kong Country, there's the old guy named Cranky Kong.
Yeah, is that supposed to be the OG Donkey Kong?
He's the original Donkey Kong. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I always thought. It's like that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, moving along the brief timeline of arcade games. In 1981, we talked about Galaga that came out, but JP, have you heard of Frogger?
Frog. I've heard of frogs, but I haven't heard of Frogger before.
So in Frogger, you're a frog, and you have to cross these lanes of traffic and to get to a lily pad on the other side of the river. And once you get to the river, you have to go in the correct little section. and you have to jump on logs and all this and stuff. It's a lot of fun, and it's very popular.
It's really hard, though.
Yes.
They didn't mess around back then with their difficulty.
No, because they wanted you to keep putting in money to keep
Right.
playing. So, I mean, they were money machines. I mean, that's the whole point. They make them very difficult. It's like a carnival game. Like, oh, that seems easy. I should be able to beat it. But it's rigged in some aspect, and so they keep it's a way to keep you paying and playing.
Yeah.
And have you guys heard of Dragon's Lair?
Yes.
Okay, I've seen it, and I always thought it was so weird because, like, man, this just looks like a Disney cartoon, but it's an arcade game that you play.
Have you seen that, JP?
Dragon Slayer.
Dragon's Lair.
Yeah, so you're a knight. I think it's your name is like Dick the Brave or something like that. I think that's what it's called. And you go and you have to save a princess, and it's basically like you're watching a cartoon, and these things pop up, and you have to react to it. It seems pretty cool, but
It's kind of like Dora the Explorer, like Dora the Explorer with.
No,
not at all
quite.
like that.
but I looked on YouTube. You can watch a full recorded playthrough of it, so it's like you're watching the game. It's pretty cool. So JP, I recommend it.
Well, and what's cool about that, like kind of like a little nerdy like side note, is the guy who animated the game, Don Bluth, is the guy who made like Land Before Time and Five Will Goes West. And,
oh well, then I'll support that.
Yeah.
Because I love Land Before Time as a kid.
And so it's pretty neat, and it's pretty wild just to watch on YouTube. Because actually, it was recently in. It was in Stranger Things. They were playing that game in Stranger Things.
Oh man,
season 2 recently.
I was actually thinking about arcades when or Stranger Things when we're talking about arcades because they're in the arcade a lot in Stranger Things, at least in season 2.
But
Yeah.
all right, so Nick, what else you got for arcades?
Well, I got a little bit more. Paperboy, that was a fun game. If you played it in the arcade where you had an actual like bike handle and you had to throw papers at people's doors, that was fun. The post-golden age of arcade games started in 1987. Double Dragon came out, and then it seems like a lot of fighting games got really popular. Street Fighter II came out in 1991, and that was a cartoon fighting game, if you don't know, with Hadouken and all this stuff, and it's really cool. And then in 1992, Mortal Kombat came out, and there was a ton of controversy about it because it looked so realistic. It was very violent, very bloody, and there was these things called fatalities. JP, have you heard of a fatality?
Yeah, a time or two I've heard of a fatality. So I'm talking about, a guy killing another guy.
Yeah.
Is that what we're talking about? Okay.
That's
correct.
Pretty much. So it'd be a finishing move that your character would do.
Okay.
So,
it was a move. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so
you beat the other player, and then the guy. So let's say that I'm fighting you in the game, and I beat you. But what happens is your character, instead of falling down and getting beat, you sit there and you kind of like stand and sway back and forth a little bit. So then, what happens, Nick?
You enter in some combination of moves, and then basically your character just does this insane thing. I think like Scorpion would rip out your spinal cord, and so he would hold out your spinal cord and your skull as your corpse would fall on the ground, and then I think Sub-Zero would freeze you and then punch you in blood, and ice would go everywhere. It was crazy stuff. Well, so around that time, arcades started to decline, mainly, I'm sure, because consoles were becoming more prominent in people's homes, so they weren't going out to play video games when you could play them in your house. So they would do different things. Dance Dance Revolution came out in 1998. That's the game where you jump on the little dance pad.
I'll still play that if I'm at a Dave & Buster's or something like that.
Yeah. And then Hydro Thunder was a really big racing game where you're on boats, like these high-powered boats going through stuff, and came out in 99, and that's a really cool game. But some of the best-selling arcade games of all time, do y'all take a guess at the top one? What's the best-selling game?
Top best-selling arcade game. JP, you want to try first?
I don't know. Pac-Man.
I'm going to say Street Fighter 2.
JP's correct.
Whoa,
it was in fact
man.
it was Pac-Man, followed by Space Invaders, and then Street Fighter 2, and then Donkey Kong and Ms. Pac-Man. They were the top best-selling games. But yeah, so arcades have started dying down. You can't really see them that often. You'll still find them in different places. Obviously, like you guys said, Dave & Buster's. That's a pretty cool thing. Chuck E. Cheese And one thing Dietz and I talked about, there's a lot of beercades out there now where there's these bars where the main draw is obviously the alcoholic beverages, but there's all these old arcade games lining the walls, and some of them are free to play. I think there's some places you have to actually pay.
Well, it's kind of like a Dave and Buster's.
Well, so there's one actually. If I can pimp a a local business, the Bishop Cidercade in Dallas, right? So you pay an entry fee, and then the games are free, and basically you just drink a bunch of cider and play a bunch of games.
Oh.
And they have a lot. There's a lot of kind of places like that now. We went to one at your bachelor party in Austin, didn't we, Nick?
Yes, we did. And that was actually, yeah. I mean, yes. I mean, there's a lot of arcades that are like that. I've been to several across the country, and they're fun. And I think the main draw is the nostalgia factor, too, because you grew up playing these games, or like maybe at the tail end of it, and you're just there to have a good time, play games. And it's really fun.
Yeah.
Even if you don't like to drink, it's still fun to go and play to kind of relive that arcade culture that's really dying out. I mean, it's not near as, like I said, prominent as it used to be.
Because arcades are a social place, right? And because you're supposed to play with people. But now, it's so easy to play games online that, I feel like a lot of kids that didn't grow up with arcades aren't interested in arcades. So that's why, they're starting to become marketed towards adults now. All right, well, that kind of brings us to the next, thing. And I'm going to move through this kind of quickly. Atari, right? So, JP, the first home video game console was the Atari. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, I've heard of Atari.
Heard of Atari,
yes.
Okay. Well, so they released a game. They released Pong, which Nick mentioned earlier, in 1972 on home console. But what was funny is it was just Pong. So you didn't put games into it. You just buy it, and it's this machine that plays Pong on your TV. You hook it up. I was kind of hanging out with family a few weeks ago, and one of my uncles was talking about how back in the day, whenever they had Pong, so you're playing Pong, right? And you're like, man, getting bored of playing Pong. Do y'all want to play something else? Sure, okay. What do you want to play? Let's play tennis, okay, on the TV. So what you do...
It isn't the same thing,
yes,
though?
it is. They have a film, like this little film thing, that you put over your TV screen, and it turns it green. Now you're playing tennis.
Oh,
okay?
my God.
Once you get bored of that, you could be like, okay, want to play... ping pong now, you just peel off the green.
So it's the same exact game.
And you put on a blue one. Now it's table tennis. There you go. That's what they had back then, though.
See, as a little kid, I was playing the real thing.
The real thing, yeah. Can't compare. But in 1977, the Atari 2600 came out, and what was genius about that was that it was a video game console that you insert cartridges into to change out the game, right? So that's what we know video game console as now. And a lot of the games for the Atari 2600 were ports of arcade games. So a lot of the ones that Nick mentioned were on the Atari 2600. There were a couple iconic original games though for it. Adventure, Haunted House, and Pitfall are kind of the big Atari games that weren't lesser ports of arcade games. And then, of course, there's the infamous E.T. game. Yeah, so Nick, you know a little bit about the story about the E.T. game.
Yeah, there's actually been a documentary about it. The main thing is, so E.T. came out when the movie came out, E.T., and I think the guy that was told to develop it had a month and a half. I mean, it was an insane amount of time to develop this game, and he worked nonstop. Anyways, when it came out, it was crazy difficult. Nobody liked it, and it got so much flack. A lot of people consider it to be one of the worst games of all time, and because it was received with such harsh reviews, I don't know who decided this, but they said, "Hey, let's just get all the ET cartridges and put them in a landfill in New Mexico." And just bury them.
Buried them. Thousands of game cartridges. They just buried them.
Yeah, let's just put them out there. And so it kind of became a legend. And there's a documentary. I wish I could remember what the name of it was, because it's actually really good. But it's the story of E.T. And then it's also the story of going out to this landfill where they think it is and digging up all these ET games. It was crazy.
Yeah, well, and that was actually at the time of the so there was a video game crash. What happened was too many games were coming out, and so there was a crash. There was a bunch of game consoles. Atari had like really loose publishing things, so people could just like make their own bootleg Atari games. They had pornographic Atari games. Have y'all heard about these?
Yes, I think the most infamous one was Custer's Last Stand.
Custer's Revenge.
Oh god.
Yeah. Where like the objective of the game is to rape a Native American.
Oh my
woman.
goodness gracious!
Yeah.
What year is this?
This was in like the early '80s. By the way, Nick, that documentary is called Atari Game Over.
Oh, okay. For the ET.
About the ET, yeah. But so, anyways, the video game crash that was 1983 to 1985. There was an oversaturation of video games in the market, so the value of Atari and all these other smaller game companies kind of crashed, and this was also due to the rise of the Commodore 64, which was a home computer that also played games. So that kind of added to the video game crash until the Nintendo Entertainment System came out, the NES. This was the very first Nintendo. Came out in 1983 in Japan. It was known as the Family Computer, aka the Famicom, and came out in 1985 in the United States, where it was known as the NES. And so the controller for the NES was this like little rectangular controller. It had an A button, a B button, a start button, and a select button, and a little D-pad. So it was really simple, kind of 4-button controller. And it was super popular because this is when Super Mario Brothers came out.
Yeah, and this is really like the beginning for me for video games. Like to me in my life, this was the beginning. Because my friends had the NES, and so I played a lot of games on it at my friend's house, and it was just a lot of fun. Played a lot of Super Mario and Battletoads. And
you play Duck Hunt?
Oh, yeah. You get the little light gun, you shoot a screen, and the dog runs out, picks up the ducks, and it's like, good.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
And, well, what was cool about the NES was that Nintendo is such a creative company, because this is one of the earliest video game consoles, but they had this gun. It's called the light gun, where you could aim it at the screen and shoot. So they had Duck Hunt and Wild Gunman was fun, and Hogan's Alley as well. And so they're shooting games. But they had these other accessories like, Nick, do you know about Rob?
I know it's a robot, but I had no idea what the purpose was of this.
So there's 2 games that are compatible with Rob, but it's literally like a little robot that you can buy to go with your NES, and I think they're like gyroscope or something like that is the name of one of them. But the robot would like move as you were playing the game, though, and that's pretty
pointless.
Pretty well, but it's creative though. That's really cool. And of course, they also had this thing called the Power Glove. Y'all ever seen the movie The Wizard?
No.
The Wizard. So it was this movie that came out like back in the 80s. It had the kid from Fred Savage. Y'all know who that is, right? The kid from Princess Bride.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say the show I watched as a kid when he was a kid. Like when he, Wonder Years.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So yes, that was Fred Savage. Yes. Uh-huh. And so. So there's this movie called The Wizard that was like sponsored by Nintendo, and it kind of advertised a lot of the accessories. But there's this thing called the Power Glove, where it was a glove that you wore, and you could supposedly control it with your fingers. You could control a Nintendo. So
like a wizard,
kind of just like a wizard, yeah. But actually, it was like the bad kid used it. Like the dude's name was like Lucas. He's like, I love the Power Glove. It's so bad. He's like that. But
rebel. Yeah,
exactly. And I was like, man, that kid's cool. I want a Power Glove. But in addition to that, they had the Game Boy, which came out in 1989. That was one of the earliest handheld game consoles. You know what a Game Boy is, right, JP?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know I can't remember if I ever had one, but anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's the Nintendo Entertainment System. So many classic games for that. Among my favorites, Contra. Did you ever play Contra, Nick?
Yes, not on the Nintendo, but I bought it on like Game Boy Advance, and that game is tough.
Yeah. Yeah,
that's the thing about
like,
these old games, is they're insanely difficult, but they were a lot of fun.
Well, I feel like they still had the arcade mindset where the game wasn't designed to be beat. It was just designed to challenge you a lot. Because, like, talk about Battletoads, man. That game's ridiculous.
JP, have you ever played Battletoads?
No, I think I've heard of it.
We're going to play Battletoads for the YouTube series.
Maybe that's where I heard it when you were talking about it before the show. I was like, that sounds familiar.
Battletoads is 3 levels, and the third one you can't beat. You got the first level where you kind of on the cavern. Then you got the second level where you go down the tunnel on the rope. And if you're playing with a buddy, you're not going to beat it because you can kill each other. And then the third level, you have the motorbikes, and that nobody knows what's after that level. It's impossible.
Exactly. I've heard that there's actually a lot more game after that, but I don't believe it. That's like the edge of the world. No one could venture past that.
I've actually watched videos of a video walkthrough of somebody playing and beating Battletoads. It is the most insane thing I've ever seen in my life. I'm like, there's no way anybody could beat this game. Highly recommend it.
Yeah, well, and my other favorite is Castlevania. That's also really tough. So that's the Nintendo Entertainment System. We're going to be covering that a lot more on the show, but that's just kind of the general overview. So the competitor for the Nintendo Entertainment System was a little thing called the Sega Master System. Nick, go ahead and take us away with that.
Yeah, I actually never heard of the Sega Master System until we started doing our little research for this episode. But apparently it was Sega's 8-bit competitor to the Nintendo Entertainment System. It was released in 1985, and it didn't do very well in the United States. That's probably why I never heard of it. But it was very popular over in Europe, and if you ask the average person about the Sega Master System, chances are they don't know what you're talking about. The controller was real similar to the NES. You had the 4 arrows and then 2 buttons. It wasn't that big of a deal. Iconic games, I kind of had issues trying to figure out which were some big games. There was a Sonic the Hedgehog port from the Sega Genesis.
So, because Sonic the Hedgehog was originally on Sega Genesis, but then they ported it to Sega Master System?
Yes.
Wow. Okay, see, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and then Prince of Persia. Apparently, Alex Kidd in Miracle World was a very popular game. I'm sure you guys all remember that one.
Nope.
And then Phantasy Star, Fantasy Zone, and there was a series called Wonder Boy series, called Wonder Boy, and apparently it was very popular as well.
I have heard of Wonder Boy.
Is that you're talking about was it Tenacious D song?
No. I'm talking about the nickname for the wrestler.
Ric Flair?
Ric Flair.
I thought it was. Is it Wonder Boy or Nature Boy?
Oh gosh, dang it! I'm Nature Boy.
Nature Boy?
Yeah.
Wow,
Okay.
I didn't know that. But Alex Kidd was actually the mascot of Sega for a while, but he was lame, and so that's why they came up with Sonic the Hedgehog. Because no one liked Alex Kidd, I guess. I don't even know what he looks like, honestly.
He's a kid with big glasses. He looks nerdy. He looks like he likes studying biology. I don't know.
So who's Alex Kidd? He's just a character?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's just a kid, and apparently he's in Miracle World. I really have no knowledge about this guy or this game. I'm probably thinking of some other character when I'm thinking of Alex Kidd. That's how much of an impact the Sega Master System had on my life. Moving on, the history of video games. To try to overtake Nintendo, Sega had to do something, and so they released the Sega Mega Drive, also known as the Sega Genesis. It was known as the Mega Drive in Japan, and was released in 1988 in Japan, and then released in North America in 1989. And I know a lot of people praise Nintendo for the creativity and originality, and rightfully so. But the Sega Genesis was really cool. It was actually the first game console to be backwards compatible. You could buy a Sega Genesis Power Base converter, and then you could play those old Sega Master System games. So you could play all those old games, and then they had some other add-ons like the 32X, where you could play 32-bit games, and then even Sega CD, where you just add it on and play these CD-type games on the Genesis. So bringing it back to the main Genesis, it was 16 bits, and the controller was a little bit more advanced than the NES. It had 3 buttons, A, B, and C, as opposed to 2. And
I still love the Genesis controller. Though.
It's pretty simple,
ones.
But some iconic games for it: Sonic the Hedgehog, like we talked about, Street Fighter 2, Mortal Kombat 2, Jurassic Park. There were a lot of beat 'em ups and just like a lot of fast action games. And my experience with the Sega Genesis is I rented a lot of Disney games. Like, did you guys ever play The Lion King on the Sega? Man, that game is ridiculous.
You ever play Lion King, JP?
I never played The Lion King, but that's one of my favorite Disney movies.
All right, JP, you got to play The Lion King and just try to beat the second level.
I mean, I had no idea that these were games.
Oh yeah,
games.
it was a lot of fun.
It's not surprising at all. But
it was a lot of fun playing these games that were based off cartoons that you liked because they looked just the same. So it was like you're playing your cartoon. It was really cool. But what do you guys think the best-selling games on the Genesis were?
The Lion King. I don't know.
I'm going to say Mortal Kombat and then Sonic the Hedgehog 2.
Y'all are both wrong. Actually, Dietz was close. Sonic the Hedgehog is the best-selling game all time on Sega Genesis, followed by Sonic 2, and then followed by Aladdin.
Oh.
And then after that, you got Sonic 3 and Knuckles. And then you have NBA Jam and some other stuff. But yeah, you had a lot of beat-em-ups and a lot of things like that. Vector Man was one of my favorite games on the Genesis, along with Sunset Riders. They made a Sega Genesis port, so I played that nonstop. And Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and the Hyperstone Heist, that's a really fun game. And so yeah, there's that.
One of my favorites was the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie, the game.
Oh, really? See, I mean, I guess I missed out because I love the Power Rangers. I mean, I had a life-size Power Ranger until I dismembered him once when I got mad.
Okay, so Nick, also they had the Game Gear, right?
Yes, and it was Sega's answer to the Game Boy. Now, if you recall, the Game Boy, it was in black and white, basically. There wasn't really any color. And it was very popular. It was cool. You could play whenever you wanted. Well, Sega said, hey, man, we're going to release this Game Gear. It's going to have lights. It's going to have nice sound. It's going to have color. And it came out in 1990, and it was more powerful, had more colors, and it was actually superior to the Game Boy. It's basically like having a Sega Genesis in your hands.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, but it came at a price. The Game Boy could run for over 30 hours, but the Game Gear needed 6 batteries and it would only be able to run for 3 to 5 hours. So its I say lifespan, but its lifespan for when you played it before batteries ran out was super short. So you could play it at night.
Doesn't sound very environmentally friendly.
No, I mean I'm sure it helped Duracell and Energizer because they, were selling all the batteries. But I mean,
kids listening to this, back in those days, you didn't recharge stuff. If you ran out of batteries, you had to go to the dang store and buy some more AA batteries
you know what?
and stick it in
man,
there.
I bet Duracell, those places are really hurting. I've never really thought about that.
Oh, yeah, man.
Yeah.
We should check the stocks later on and
Yeah.
see how they're doing.
Not going to invest in Duracell.
But yeah, that's crazy, though. 3 to 5 hours for 6 batteries.
But hey, man, but the games looked good. I mean,
they did, because they had a color screen, like you said. I remember playing, like, X-Men. They had the X-Men game that was on Genesis. They had a similar game on Game Gear. That game was awesome. And then, like, they had the Sonic game on Game Gear. But, yeah, it was a cool thing. It's just too bad that battery. Like, I could imagine parents getting PO'd after buying their kids that and having to constantly buy them new batteries. Well, so after the Genesis came out, the Super Nintendo came out, known as the SNES, or the SNES. In Japan, it came out in 1990. It was called the Super Famicom. In the United States, it came out in 1991. But the Super Nintendo is great. I still think some of the best games ever made are on the Super Nintendo. Would you agree, Nick?
Yeah, there are a lot of classics. I really enjoyed Super Mario World.
Yeah.
Super Mario Kart, Donkey Kong Country. What else? I mean, there's a lot of Star Fox. I bought Star Fox I don't know, a few years ago, and if you've never played the original Star Fox, they had to, for some of these later Super Nintendo games, the games itself, like, they had these extra chips to kind of handle higher quality games, because I think Star Fox was one of the first kind of 3D games for, at least for Super Nintendo. And it was insane. It is insane. It's a tough game, but it is so fun. If you can play the original Star Fox, I highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun.
Well, and they actually came out with Star Fox 2 a few years ago. Whenever they came out with Nintendo released the.
I know what you're talking about. It's like the mini Super Nintendo or something like that.
Yeah. And so that came with Star Fox 2, which apparently they had started making but never finished. Well, I guess they went ahead and finished it and released it with that. And I haven't played it yet, but that's pretty exciting. But yeah, I remember my favorite games, though. Still, I think best games of all time. Super Metroid, Super Castlevania is amazing. Zelda, A Link to the Past. And I still think these games hold up. Because what's cool is, like, you play them and they feel old school, but they don't feel dated. So Super Nintendo, highly successful console. Shortly after that, I guess a few years after that, Nintendo released this thing called the Virtual Boy. Have you guys heard of this?
The Virtual Boy?
Virtual Boy.
No.
So they had the Game Boy, and then they had the Virtual Boy. You ever heard of Virtual Boy, Nick?
I've only heard the rumors.
It's a virtual reality console. Okay, this came out in 1995. Okay, imagine that. So people are talking about the Oculus Rift nowadays and the HTC Vive, like all these new virtual reality consoles. Well, Nintendo did it first. 1995, they came out with the Virtual Boy.
So it's virtual. That sounds like something a pedophile might buy.
A Virtual Boy?
A Virtual Boy. I don't know. I just.
Well, like the Virtual Boy, it was this pair of goggles, right? But they didn't strap onto your face or anything like that. They just you just mounted it on your table and you put your face in it. Like you crouched over and put your face into the goggles.
Into the boy?
Into the boy. And
oh gosh.
Basically, it was a disaster though because it could only display the color red. So any games that you played on Virtual Boy were just red.
Sounds fun.
And only 14 games came out for it in the United States because they discontinued it within the year after it first came out, 1995. Now, video game consoles were now getting into the 3D era after the Super Nintendo, and they were being put on discs. So Sega kind of led the charge on this with the Sega Saturn. They had 3D games on Sega Saturn, though. Some iconic games were Virtual Cop and Virtual Fighter, which I remember playing those a little bit as a kid, like at friends' houses and stuff. But honestly, Sega Saturn was not a very successful console. It was kind of the beginning of Sega's decline. There weren't a lot of, it didn't sell very well. There weren't a lot of great games for it. But Sony came out with their own disc console called the Sony PlayStation. Nick, go ahead and take us away with that.
I've heard of it.
I've heard of that one. I've heard of that one.
The Sony PlayStation.
We're getting into the early 200s. 2000s now.
1995.
Oh,
yeah,
gosh,
earlier than you thought.
Yeah, and as like I've told y'all before, growing up, I rented a lot of games and consoles, and bought a Nintendo 64. I was given a Nintendo 64. And so it was great. Not a problem renting games. But I started renting games when I bought a PlayStation 2. And so I'd play some old PS1 games. And if you wanted to rent a game on a disc, it was like, good luck. Because you didn't know how scratched up it would be and if it's even playable.
Yeah.
So it was always like, I hope this game works. But anyways, that's the problem with CDs. Just kids, take care of your CDs.
Well, because back in the day, because cartridges are great. Like game cartridges are great because you could throw them around. They're perfect for kids to have. But CDs, you got to put them in the case. And whoever knew anybody growing up that actually kept their CDs in the CD case?
Me.
Really?
I took care of my CDs because I didn't want them to be scratched up where I couldn't play them.
I have to living with Nick. He does take care. He takes care of his belongings. He's pretty organized.
I do.
have to say.
Because you take the time and the money to buy the thing. Why would you just trash it for no reason? Because You can't put it in a case. Is it that difficult?
Nah, man.
No, it's super easy.
I was using mine as like frisbees and stuff. You know, I just throwing
what's
them
wrong
around.
with you, Dietz? What's wrong with you?
Well, but the trick is, if your disc gets scratched, do y'all...
You buy a new one,
No,
it's broken.
Y'all remember so there's a trick. You get toothpaste, and you scrub it with toothpaste.
I thought you put Windex on it or something like that.
Well, yeah, you could do that. But no, so if it gets scratched, though, you gotta, buff out the scratch with toothpaste, and that never worked. Your disc just had a broken game that smelled like mint.
Yeah, that's funny. You know, as a kid, I don't know where y'all went to go get movies or games to rent. Blockbuster or Hastings. I don't think I once ever rented a game as a kid. Every time I did it, I was with a friend or something.
But the PlayStation 1 was great. Had some good stuff. Had a lot of fun games. And I think it was actually one of the first games to have the analog sticks, where you have the two analog sticks that people use all the time now. Some iconic games. You have Final Fantasy VII. 8 and 9 were popular, but excuse me. But 7 was the main big one.
Yeah.
Then JP, have you heard of Crash Bandicoot?
Crash Bandicoot? No. Bandicoot.
Wait.
Bandicoot sounds familiar. But is
JP?
Bandicoot a character?
Crash Bandicoot. You never heard of Crash Bandicoot?
Crash Bandicoot. Is he like a character with Mario and them?
Well, he's not.
No.
Or is he a character on another game? Bandicoot kind of sounds.
Yes, we're talking about. Yeah.
Well, no, like a part of a different game. Like I was.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
no, he's got his own series, but I don't think he's in any other franchises.
No.
Oh.
Anyways, he's basically this orange animal, and you get the little magic mask. It was a lot of fun. And then there's Spyro the Dragon.
Spyro the Dragon.
I knew Spyro the Dragon. Okay, Spyro is kind of a reason why I don't really play video games.
Ooh.
Because I used to go over to my friend's house, and he'd be in his room playing Spyro, and I would sit there and watch him, and I would just watch the screen. And first of all, I'd be bored as hell. And then second of all, I would get nauseous because I'd be just sitting there. I get nauseous watching a screen that moves a lot.
No, I'm kind of with you. That was the worst thing about growing up with video games is you go over to your friend's house and he wants you to watch him play.
Yeah.
And you're like, this isn't fun. I want to go do something else.
Yeah, and so I would just leave and just want to get some fresh air, be outside and throw the old pigskin around. No, but golly, it's so boring sitting there watching him play the game, and he didn't even. That happened every time. I would go and they would just be fixated on their video game. I mean, I didn't want to play it, but they didn't ask me to play it anyway. And so,
see, the way that you do
I was
it,
just like kids these days.
The way that you do it is if you're playing a game that's not two-player, every time one person dies, they hand it off to the other person.
Well, my friends didn't do that.
Oh.
My quote-unquote friends.
Sound like jerks.
No, I had some good friends, but.
So, what else we got on PlayStation, though, Nick?
We got some other popular games. Tekken 3.
Yeah.
Metal Gear Solid, and a big game changer, Resident Evil and Resident Evil 2. Then there was Ape Escape and Tomb Raider, which were also... Tomb Raider obviously is pretty big, and those are some big games. But yeah, it was just 3D worlds, basically, and it was, it's at the time, super immersive.
It was mind-blowing. I remember being at Best Buy, I was a little kid, and I was with my parents, and I saw Crash Bandicoot, and I was playing it, and I was like, one day, can I get one of these? And my parents were like, probably not. But one day we did get it, but it was way later.
I'm gonna look up Crash Bandicoot.
Yeah, look up a picture.
I think I would recognize him.
You would.
So, we got the PlayStation. What was the other one? The other console of that time?
The next one, kind of like the rival of PlayStation, was the Nintendo 64, we've talked about, released in 1996 North America, and it was actually the last console to use cartridges. And it was called Nintendo 64 because it was 64-bit graphics.
Which technically was more than any other console that had come out before, because the PlayStation was still 32.
Yeah, and one of the cool things about the controller, it looked completely different than any other controller at the time.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. You need 3 hands to hold it correctly.
Yeah, I remember the first time I got it, and I was like, how do I hold this thing? And so...
Wait, you talking about the N64 controller?
Yeah.
The little joystick?
Why are there 3 handles on it? Is it made for aliens?
I don't know, but I think they just want to do something innovative, and that's one thing I like about Nintendo. They're not scared.
It's to be
mix things up
right-handed
and do new
and
things.
left-handed friendly, maybe.
Yeah, I guess. But anyways, it's pretty cool because you got the Z button at the bottom for the trigger. Then you got you still have your classic A and B. Then you have all these C's because why not? Then you got the left, right bumper, and then the arrows on the left and the joystick. It was crazy. It looks kind of like the Monster logo. And then in '99, the N64 released an expansion pack to upgrade the Nintendo 64's RAM to 8 megabytes.
And so I remember you needed that to play Perfect Dark.
Yeah, you need to play Perfect Dark, Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, and I think it came with Donkey Kong 64.
Okay,
Donkey Kong
right.
64, when it came out, it was huge, and so I didn't get to play those games because I didn't have the expansion pack. But it was mind-blowing. But some of the big games... So I played a lot of Nintendo 64 because it was the first console I had in my house, and probably one of the best games on the Nintendo 64, and probably one of my favorite games of all time, Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time.
Yes.
Yeah, it holds up so well. The graphics, I mean, obviously they're a little dated because it came out more like in '98, something like that, but still, it's so much fun.
So, JP, if I were to be like, you have to play a video game, it'd probably be Zelda Ocarina of Time. It's so influential.
It's fantastic. The story's good. The puzzles are fun. It feels like it should be an action game, but it's not. But there's still a lot of action in it, and there's just so much to do. It was awesome. And plus, you get to play a flute whenever you want to, so that was pretty cool too.
Yeah.
And then, anyways, that's great. But one thing that's really cool about the Nintendo 64, they released a bunch of games that were popular on NES and Super Nintendo, and basically it's like redid them for. Like, hey, we got these new capabilities. Let's make the games we wanted to back in the early '90s and late '80s. Star Fox 64. We talked about Star Fox on the Super Nintendo. Star Fox 64 is the exact same game as the original Star Fox, but obviously with better graphics and more things to do. But it's the exact game, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And anyway, some other popular games. GoldenEye, another game changer.
I played that one. I played GoldenEye. That was one of the games I played.
And then you got Super Mario 64. Basically, this was the system for Mario because you had Mario Party, Mario Tennis, Mario Golf, Super Smash Brothers, where all the characters fought each other. You had Diddy Kong Racing. Jet Force Gemini was another really fun game.
I think I Diddy Kong Racing.
And then Banjo-Kazooie was a really cool platformer. And then one game that was really cool. Did you guys play Pokemon Stadium?
I never played Pokemon Stadium.
But you know about it.
Didn't you import your Pokemon from your Pokemon Game Boy game? Yeah.
Yes, and that was so cool
Yeah.
because you were playing Pokemon in your Game Boy game. You're like, man, this is fun. But there was a little expansion pack you could put into your controller and put your game in that expansion pack, and you could see a big 3D look of your Pokemon on the Nintendo 64. It was so cool, and obviously I'm still pumped up about it because I'm getting excited just talking about it. But it was mind blowing because it's like you train these Pokemon in like a 2D like these crappy graphics, and all of a sudden they're like kicking ass. Like in 3D, it was so awesome.
Like they come to life, you know.
Oh yeah.
I do remember Pokemon Snap though. That game was awesome.
Yeah, no, it was fun. It was basically a rail shooter, but you're taking pictures instead of killing the Pokemon. So that was.
Hey, y'all want to know the only Pokemon card I ever got?
Was it Charizard?
I got one. It was the energy card.
That's a good.
Which one?
I don't know. It was red, I think.
So for Nintendo 64 though, there are also some awesome Star Wars games, right?
Oh yeah.
Like Rogue Squadron, I remember was one of my favorites, and then like Shadows of the Empire was awesome as well. But I remember the first level was always the best one, where it's Star Wars. JP, are you familiar with Star Wars?
I think I heard it once a couple of years ago. Yeah. No, I do like Star Wars. More recently, I've gotten more into Star Wars.
Yeah. But you still haven't seen the original trilogy, right?
Nope, I haven't.
Yeah. So we're going to cover that on a future episode. But yeah, Nick, I remember Shadows of the Empire had the first level where you're playing in the Battle of Hoth. I remember playing that.
See, I actually didn't like the very first level. I liked the one after that where you're in the base and you're trying to get out while it was being overrun by the Imperial forces. That was a lot of fun. And then of course you have pod racing as well. That was pretty cool. Put you in the action after Episode 1 came out.
Pod racing was great. You know, because on the for listeners who are coming over from the What is Sports podcast, because we did the Indy 500, and Nick, I remember you texted me and you said that it made you think of pod racing.
Yeah.
And sure enough, I thought of this game. This is a great game, the Star Wars Episode 1 pod racing.
I don't think we mentioned Mario Kart 64. That was one of the biggest games, and it's so fun, and it's hard to beat Mario Kart. I mean, it's a blast, and this one had look so real, and you're being your favorite Nintendo characters, driving around Mario characters. Is a lot of fun.
What's great is even the new Mario Kart games aren't that different from the original. I mean, they have better graphics, but still basically the same thing. So it tells you how good the original was. Now, so we just talked about the Nintendo 64, one of the greatest consoles of all time. Now let's talk about one of the most forgettable consoles, the Sega Dreamcast. This came out in Japan in 1998, and the United States in 1999. This was the last Sega game console to ever be released. And again, it came out in 1999. The console was discontinued in March 2001.
Yikes.
So it only lasts 2 years. And it was the death of Sega as a hardware company. They still publish software, like games and stuff, but they don't make consoles anymore because the Dreamcast failed so hard. And I remember I had some fun with the Dreamcast. I did know some people who owned one, but really the only games I remember playing were Crazy Taxi, which I played a lot of.
Hey,
and Sonic Adventure.
I just want to say, Crazy Taxi, that game. What's the first thing you think of when you hear Crazy Taxi?
Offspring.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, man, I love that song. And that's a fun game. But
oh yeah, classic. Now, unfortunately, the Dreamcast didn't last too long. Then you get kind of towards the more modern era. You get the Nintendo GameCube, which came out, I think, in the year 2000 or 2001. And really, this is when Nintendo kind of became a niche console, where like the only people who bought Nintendo consoles were people who really loved the Nintendo characters like Donkey Kong and Mario and all that stuff, and Zelda. But after the GameCube, they came out with the Wii, which obviously was a big hit. A lot of people had the Wii. I think it was kind of like people were excited about the motion controls and Wii Tennis.
Yeah,
basically.
God, I was about to like Wii Sports. Gosh, that's fun. I don't know what's so fun about it.
Yeah, and a lot of people, that was the only game that they owned. Yeah, and then you have the Wii U, which nobody bought. It was pretty similar to the Wii, except it had a controller with a screen on it that you held. I actually own the Wii U. There's some good games on it, but not a whole lot of them. And then you have the Nintendo Switch, which is the newest Nintendo console. It's basically like a screen. Like it has a touch screen that you hold, or you can bring it with you. So it's like Nintendo's attempt to mix the portable console that they used to have with like the Game Boy and stuff with the home console. It's pretty cool. I mean, it seems to have some good games on it, but I don't know. It feels like they don't come out with a lot of new games on it frequently, though. Now, on the other side of things, Nick, we got the PlayStation, right?
yeah, so like I said before, I had a PS2 growing up as well. It was released in 2000 in North America, and it competed with the Dreamcast, the GameCube, and the original Xbox. And a little fun fact for you kids out there, the PS2 is the best-selling video game console of all time.
Yep.
Oh, wow.
I believe it.
Yeah, and guess, do you guys know the lifespan of the console? So it was released in 2000. When was it discontinued? Any guesses?
And I want to guess 2012.
2012. I'll say 2010.
2013.
Oh, man.
Yeah, so
we even had the only game consoles we ever had at our house was the N64 and PlayStation 2.
Yeah, well, it was cool. Sold 155 million units as of January 4th, 2013, and the games weren't CDs; they were DVDs, and you could actually play online with it with a network adapter. And I remember one of my birthdays, I just wanted a network adapter so I could play online. I thought it was so cool. And one of my big gifts for my parents was a network adapter. I said, all right. And I opened it up. I was so excited. And my dad goes, what is that? And my mom said, I don't know. And I was like, man, it was so cool. But anyways.
What did you play online?
I played Tribes Aerial Assault. I wanted to play SOCOM online, but I didn't have. I only had dial-up. I didn't have like the Ethernet cable, so I was limited to what I could play. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember I actually got DSL. I convinced my mom to get it for us so that I could play SOCOM 2 on my PlayStation. Of course, I didn't say that.
SOCOM was a great game.
Yeah. All you kids out there, back in the day, you had dial-up internet through like AOL or something like that, and it was super slow. And the deal was, if like your family couldn't use the phone while you were on the internet, it's a real pain in the neck. But then I remember, they came up with the new internet DSL, and I remember installing it and hooking up my PlayStation Network adapter and playing SOCOM 2 and being like, whoa, this is amazing. That was the first time I'd played video games online.
It is pretty cool. Like I said, I played Tribes Aerial Assault, and that was a lot of fun. But some of the big games that came out, do you guys remember hearing about a game called Grand Theft Auto 3?
Oh boy, do I!
I remember Grand Theft, like just 1 and 2, I guess. But
I'm sure that the one you're thinking of is Grand Theft Auto 3. That's the one where it was like a media sensation.
Okay, I guess.
Like they were talking about kids these days beating up prostitutes on the video games and all that.
Yeah, and you could have sex with prostitutes and kill anybody you want.
Yeah.
And it was, and as much flack as it got, I mean, it was very violent and graphic. But
for like a 13-year-old, it was the greatest thing on earth.
Well, not just that, but I mean, like, after that game came out, there were so many games that used that formula of open world where you had different places to go get quests. Like, there's so many games that are like that now. And obviously minus the prostitutes and the drug use and all of that. But there were a ton of different games that copy that formula.
Yeah, like even stuff like Assassin's Creed, obviously, Red Dead.
I mean, shoot, even Batman, Arkham City, and Arkham Asylum. Those are that kind of style.
Yeah.
I remember Jack and Daxter was a big platforming game that came out on the PS2, and it was a lot of fun. I highly recommend playing it. And then Jak 2 shot the series in some other dimension, where it was like a fun, playful game in the first one. Jak 2, your guy now shoots guns.
Yeah, it was GTA for kids.
Yeah, basically. And so it was a lot of fun. But anyway, some of the popular games that came out on the PS2, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas was the best-selling game.
That's the one I had. That's the one my Nana got us, and she had no
Your
idea.
Nana got Grand Theft Auto San
she had no
Andreas?
idea what it was. It makes me feel bad thinking about it, but I mean, I didn't even really play it that much.
But there was also Final Fantasy X. That was a really good one. Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty and 3, Snake Eater, Kingdom Hearts, God of War was a big game and was a big series for PlayStation. Jak and Daxter, mentioned that. Ratchet and Clank. And then Killzone, that's one of my favorite video game series out there. Yeah. And then all those Guitar Hero games came out, and that was cool. Did you guys play the iToy? Where it was a camera that you would hook up to your PlayStation, put it on top of your TV. It's basically the precursor to the Xbox Kinect. And it would broadcast you on your TV, and you play these little games. It was a lot of fun.
I guess I had forgotten that was on PlayStation 2.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
I remember playing Need for Speed. That was a pretty fun game.
Oh yeah, that was. Did you play it? Which one did you play? Do you remember?
The one the Wu-Tang Clan, is that their name, or they're singing on it? Oh, ski.
Oh yeah,
that was
Underground.
That was Need for Speed Underground. But that's Lil Jon.
That's a good one. Yeah, that's Lil Jon though, not Wu-Tang.
Oh, okay.
and the East Side Boys.
Yeah.
But that was a fun game. I played that on Xbox. Then after that, the PlayStation 3 was released in 2006, and that's when, for PlayStation, that's when online play really became big, and they had the PlayStation Network, and the games were now being played on Blu-ray discs so they could have more information on them. And some popular series on PlayStation 3 Now, I mean, obviously we're getting more modern times. Resistance, that was a fun series. Uncharted, a blast. Little Big Planet, JP, have you played Little Big Planet?
No.
Oh, well, it's fun. You're basically
we
a
played
little
some
puppet.
back in college. Well,
Little Big Planet?
I don't remember if you played with us, but me and Nick played some in college, though. Yeah.
Then you got, I don't know, there's a lot of exclusives. You have The Last of Us, like I mentioned before, and the Walking Dead Telltale series, which is basically like a click and point adventure game, basically, but it was a lot of fun. Online play really took off, and I think with the popularity of Call of Duty 4, Modern Warfare, and then all the other Call of Duties, people really started flocking to online play. And there was a lot of games in this time that were basically, since people were playing a lot of online games, the developers realized, why spend the time, money, and effort working on single-player campaigns if they're just going to breeze through it and then just do nothing but multiplayer? And some games started doing just that and becoming multiplayer only. I think the first one to do it was Titanfall on the PC. Mm-hmm. And then at the time, they got a lot of flack. Like, what? There's no single player. What's the point? And then, of course, when Titanfall 2 came out, they had a single-player campaign, and that was pretty awesome.
Well, see, but before that, there's stuff like... So there's Counter-Strike on PC.
Yeah.
But stuff wasn't like that on consoles, though.
Right.
And so now you also have, like, Black Ops 4 is online only, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I lost interest in Call of Duty after Black Ops 2, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, they were kind of the same, but still, I mean, that defined a genre. Like, people, like, so many games have copied the Call of Duty format just because it's so popular. And then that brings us back to today. PlayStation 4 released in 2013, and with that, you're now starting to see a lot of game developers creating fantastic single-player stories and experiences. God of War, they did a remake, and even at the end of PS3, I mentioned The Last of Us. If you haven't played The Last of Us, I highly recommend it. It's a fantastic game and an incredible story. To me, it reminds me of like a Black Mirror episode, that feeling that you get, because usually after watching Black Mirror, like, it really sticks with you. It sticks with me, and that's how I felt with The Last of Us, so I highly recommend it. It's
like haunting. Like, even people who don't like video games, I would say, experience The Last of Us just for the story, because it really is like just a genuinely great story experience.
Right. Oh, yeah. And that, and even Uncharted is a lot of fun and a lot of action, but it's great storytelling as well.
Well, and to bring it all around, actually, The Last of Us and Uncharted are made by the same company that created Crash Bandicoot way back in the PlayStation day.
And also created Jak and Daxter.
Jak and Daxter, yeah. And so it's...
Naughty Dog,
yeah, is the name of the company. And so it's cool to see, like, their different franchises and how that represents the change in video games from the PlayStation era to the PlayStation 4 era. It's pretty neat to see how it's evolved.
Oh yeah, and sorry to cut you off, but one thing I wanted to say too is, we talked about earlier how, like, the NES, Super Nintendo, and Sega Genesis, they had a lot of tough games, and I remember, in like the PS2 generation and Xbox, they started to really lighten up and give you so many checkpoints and save opportunities and make games much easier. And that's fun and it's helpful, but there's one video game developer, one company, that said, you know what, we're not going to do that. We're going to make games punishing but rewarding. And Dietz, are you familiar with the developer From Software?
I most certainly am.
Where they created Bloodborne and Dark Souls, which are some very fun games, some very difficult games, but very rewarding and very fair.
Yes, I know that you guys remember the days back in college of me playing Dark Souls 1 and getting mad and losing all the time. And but what's funny is, I think you said this at one point, Nick, because you started playing Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3, is it takes you back to the days where you're playing a game as a kid and you're so frustrated, you're like pissed off at the game.
You want to throw your controller at the screen. It's great.
Greatest games ever made.
Oh yeah. If any game makes you feel that way in the right way, they're doing something right. Obviously, if it's a bad game, that's not good. But Bloodborne and Dark Souls, they're done right and they're challenging and so fun.
Yeah.
It was fun watching Dietz play them and getting upset.
Get mad.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I want to do for this podcast. I want us to film JP playing Dark Souls. I just want him to get to try to beat the first boss. That's all I want to see.
I say may take all year.
Yeah, I mean it's going to take a long time. It'll be great to see though. Now, so I'm going to take us really quickly through the Xbox evolution, starting with the Microsoft Xbox, which came out back in 2001. The big significant thing about the Xbox was Xbox Live, right? It had online play, and the big thing that pushed online play on home video game consoles was Halo 2. That was the hot stuff for any kid back in the day. You had a Xbox Live. You brought your friends over. You all played Halo together. Now Xbox kind of has less exclusive games. Fable, Halo, Gears of War are kind of the ones that have been exclusive throughout its growth. But you had the Xbox that came out in 2001. Xbox 360 came out in 2005. And then the Xbox One in 2013. Xbox's main kind of identity has been that it's technically been the most advanced console, like from a hardware perspective. But the flip side is the exclusives aren't as good. Or there aren't as many exclusives, I should say. This has been a long episode, hasn't it? I think we should wrap things up a bit. To conclude, though, JP, you just received an overview of video games, period. We're going to spend more time diving into some of these franchises and maybe even some consoles and stuff, but this is an introductory topic. The next episode is going to be similar to this. We're going to do comic books. In addition to that, however, for this show, we are doing a book club type deal. Dune by Frank Herbert. A really iconic science fiction book that neither of y'all have read, but I picked this book because it's super influential on science fiction. If you're listening to this, you can read along. Dune is separated into 3 books. We're going to be reading through book 1 for next episode. So if you want to read along, go ahead and do so. We'll be talking about that in addition to the regular stuff. So but that's about it for this episode of What is Nerd? Thank you again for listening. And again, check out our YouTube channel. It should be coming up within the next week or so, in which JP and I play some old school video games.
I'm kind of looking forward to it.
Yeah.
I'm finally going to discover video games.
Yes, after hearing about it, now
it's
you
never
get
too late.
Yeah, exactly. You might become a freaking nerd after all this. Yeah, thanks again for listening. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, all that stuff. If you have any comments or questions or feedback, send it to us at winerdcast@gmail.com. Once again, I'm your host, Tyler Dietz. With me are my good pals, Nick Grant and JP Cochran. We will see you guys next Friday.
See ya.